So this video resumes at the bottom of page 96, immediately after the arrest of Mickey for the robbery that went wrong with Sammy. Now, at the end of the preceding section, you have that line of Linda's terrible bathos at the end of such a great dramatic moment, the arrest of the boys, and Linda, all she can say is, "But I've ironed him a shirt." A shirt, you know, that symbol of domesticity, of and the ironing of shirts, you know, that symbol of a well-ordered household. It demonstrates just how easily these attempts at a normal life can be overwhelmed by the input of fate, and in this case, really, the destiny that is mapped out for these characters is shown by Willie Russell to be dominated by society and the restrictions that places on people. So, we see Mickey placed in a prison cell and quietly crying. Think about this in stagecraft terms. See how we have this moment of stillness compared to the running around and the noise of the previous section. All that intensity has gone. The rhyming of "shot him" and the bloody did, "I've got to get this hid," all that is gone, and we're left with this real moment of reflection, this real moment of what we call pathos. Not pathos with a B, but pathos with a P for Peter, meaning sort of sadness. Mrs. Johnston enters. Now, it's interesting because once again, Mrs. Johnston as a character is used for sort of exposition purposes. As she is, for example, at the beginning of Act 1, as she is, for example, at the beginning of Act 2, with the Marilyn Monroe songs there. And it's interesting that there's now a return to that same motif. Now, when we talked about the Marilyn Monroe motif earlier in the play, we said about how it's used in a very positive, a very aspirational way as something to look up to. Marilyn Monroe, the sex symbol, the beauty icon, etc. However, we also said that for an audience in 1983, when this play was first performed, there would have been an element of dramatic irony in that, because of course what we know and what they knew then, but which the characters at the beginning of this play back in the 1950s did not know, is that the Marilyn Monroe story would itself not end happily. So you also have that element of the kind of tragic foreshadowing there. However, now events have, as it were, caught up with the Marilyn Monroe story, and so now when characters refer to her, they are now acknowledging that changed aspect of her life, which is to say, her own decline into mental health problems, drug addictions, and death. And it's interesting that those features are particularly going to be characteristics of her that will be important in the remaining 10 pages or so of this play. So, she sings then, "The jury found him guilty, sent him down for 7 years. Though he acted like they gave him life, he couldn't stop the tears. And when we went to visit him, he didn't want to know. It seemed like jail, sent him off the rails, just like Marilyn Monroe. His mind's gone dancing, can't stop dancing." So there we are. This idea of being off the rails as a sort of metaphor for mental ill health, and the simile, just like Marilyn Monroe, it's that negative side of her that's now being applied to Mickey. There is a degree of intensity with the kind of periodic rhymes that we see in this section, but it lacks the sort of real violent intensity of the previous section. It's much sadder and much more wistful. Now, I said that the Marilyn Monroe motif has now been, as it were, subverted to a more melancholy use, and similarly with the idea of dancing. Now, at the beginning of this play, dancing is used very much with reference to escapism in a very positive context. It's a happy moment, a happy way of getting out of, as it were, the difficult life that you lead. But what we start to see now is, while it still has it has escapist connotations, it's in a much sadder sense. His mind's gone dancing. He is suffering from some sort of terrible thing, probably depression, which is what is mentioned in the next stanza. So a doctor enters the cell and examines Mickey, and Mrs. Johnston continues. They showed him to a doctor, and after routine test, a prescription note the doctor wrote for the chronically depressed. There we have the diagnosis. And there again we have another parallel with the Marilyn Monroe thing, which is then emphasised in a moment. And now the tears have stopped. He sits and counts the days to go and treats his ills with daily pills, just like Marilyn Monroe. So now we have another aspect of the Marilyn Monroe comparison, the drug use. But there's a wider thing going on here. It's not simply that Mickey ends up like her, it's this idea that it is, if not an inevitability, then certainly a very great risk for members of the working class that they will suffer these kind of problems because of the challenges placed on them by living in this broken society, and by the influence that those challenges have on them. So, very sad indeed. The doctor exits, and once again she echoes, now they stop his mind from dancing, stop it dancing. So the fact that this is using the same melody as the previous incarnations of the Marilyn Monroe song, but now in this rather sadder key, is important, because it establishes a kind of parallel now. And if you think about it, so many of Mrs. Johnston's moments are in themselves sad ones. Certainly the Act 1 scene, the opening Marilyn Monroe song is. And I suppose when she sings the Act 2 one, at the beginning of Act 2, we have this moment of false hope. But as we said, because this is a tragedy and because of what we know, we always know deep down that it is going to be false hope, that it's never going to end well for them. But yes, the pills, then it says, stop his mind from dancing. And that's interesting, because then we have a sense that Mickey is now becoming a prisoner of his illness. It's not like there's anything that he can do which can help him with it. Now, a prison warder leads Linda into the cell. He indicates a seat opposite Mickey, and she asks, "What are you doing?" He replies, "What? I'm taking my tablet." "Listen, Mickey, I've told you, they're just junk. You'll be home soon, Mickey, and you should come off them." "Why? I need to take them." And here we get then evidence of the addiction, but also, again, it's the desperation from Mickey of looking for something that can help him to, as it were, escape the struggles of his life. As you said, they do come under that escapist sort of agenda. It's worth pointing out, actually, that at this time, contextually, there were moves to cut down the amount of money being spent by governments on healthcare budgets. And as a result of it, one of the experiments that they tried was something known as Care in the Community. That was the name of the initiative. And essentially what they did is they slashed funding for mental health provision, which had previously been very commonly provided, for example, in large mental hospitals and large asylums, but properly funded and provided. And what they actually did was to do away with that. There was a huge upsurge in the number of people being prescribed with medication, and the theory was that they would try and care in the community was meant to help people to live, but of course without funding and without investment, what it actually meant is that many people were simply abandoned by the system. So I think we can see evidence of this here, how the first response to Mickey is not help but medication, and he is left adrift. So we continue then. Linda out of her love and care for him, says, "Listen, Mickey, you..." And he says, "No, see," he says, the doctor, he said, "What did he say?" And Mickey replies, "He said about me nerves and how I get depressed and I need to take them because they make me better." Linda replies, "I get depressed, but I don't take those." "You don't need those, Mickey." Worth reminding then, it's significant. If we've said that mental health problems are what Willie Russell is saying are a big problem for members of the working class, it's very important to note that Linda says she gets it too. That doubles the kind of power of that point, doesn't it? The fact that they both feel it. "You don't need those, Mickey." And he replies, "Leave me alone, will you? I can't cope with this. I'm not well. The doctor said, didn't he? I'm not well. I can't do things. Leave me alone." You get a sense of his desolation, his sadness, and as a result he's pushing away the only people who care about him. The warder escorts Linda from the cell. During the following verse, Mickey leaves the prison and goes home. Mrs. Johnston sings, picking up the same melody as previously, and says, "With grace for good behaviour, he got out before his time. The family and the neighbours told him he was looking fine. But he's feeling 15 years older, and his speech is rather slow. And the neighbours said you'd think he was dead like Marilyn Monroe. No cause for dancing, no more dancing." Now, again, exposition. It doesn't specify exactly how many years Mickey serves. One assumes it's at least half his sentence, so it's likely to be perhaps 3.5 years, perhaps 5 years. So once again, we have another violation of that classical tragic unity of time. Once again, we have this Brechtian subversion of those things, and the fact that it's specifically referenced in the text means that it's drawn attention to. It can be described as another part of the alienation effect, which Brecht, we know, was very fond of. Now, another key quotation, "He's feeling 15 years older." Now, you have to cluster that with all the ones about premature aging. For example, Mrs. Johnston, when it says by the time she was 25, she looked like 42, and all that sort of thing. You have to cluster that quotation with that. Similarly with the ones about Linda, demonstrating the same thing, about the effects of this difficult and stressful lifestyle, and emphasizing the effects of what we've called, the cycle of deprivation, the cycle of inequality, and so on. Another reference to Marilyn Monroe, you'd think he was dead. Again, it's a bit of foreshadowing, but metaphorically the sense that he is deadened inside, perhaps by guilt, but also by the drugs that he is using, perhaps. And no cause for dancing speaks for itself. No more dancing, no more escapism, no more happiness. Now, Linda approaches Mrs. Johnston. She is weighed down with shopping bags and is weary. Now, again, if we want to emphasize, again, the cyclical nature of life for the working classes, the fact that we're now seeing Linda again prematurely aged, again groups with the point that we just made, the fact that she is weary similarly. Mrs. Johnston says, "Linda, where have you been? We've got to do something about him. He's been out for months and he's still taking those pills. Linda, he needs a job. You two need a place of your own." And Ma'am, that's why I'm late. I've been to see. We're moving at the end of the month. We've got our own place and I think I've got Mickey a job. Oh, Jesus, thank God. But how? It's all right. Someone I know. But now, we can all imagine, can't we, who's the one person that Linda knows who might be able to influence anything. Of course, it's Eddie that she's been to. That's the old friend that she's called on in her time of need. Is that a betrayal? Well, if we take the idea of the working class pride aspect and the hatred of charity, then perhaps, yes, you can see why that might be something to resent. And yet, what choice does Linda have? In loving her husband, in trying to help him, she's used the one resource that she had available. Now, it's also interesting, I think, we see this at the beginning with Mrs. Johnston, we see it again now, because in a sense, Willie Russell presents women as it were, the glue that holds these communities together. Their care, their love and attention that keeps the household running, that takes care of the children, and in many cases helps to ease things along for their husbands as well. And we see that here now. So I think it's a powerful point from a, well, in some ways it can be seen as a sort of feminist point of view, in the sense that it shows the positive influence that women can have. However, if you look at it the other way, you could also argue the fact that they're shown as being imprisoned by this domestic context. However, again, perhaps we can say that this shows Linda's determination not to be limited entirely by that. At any rate, we can carry on. So, Linda continues, "It's all right, ma'am. Did you get our Sarah from school?" Presumably Sarah being their baby. Mrs. Johnson says, "Yeah, she's in bed, but listen, how did you manage to..." Says, "Never mind, ma'am. Isn't it great? If he's working, we've got our own place. He'll be able to get himself together and stop taking those friggin' things." They start to leave. Now again, notice there that we have elements of the kind of false hope that creeps in, which again actually is quite a tragic feature. This idea that hope against hope, we somehow wish that the ending, which we know is likely, might not happen. But equally, in our heart of hearts, we know that nothing can stop it, not least because in this play, not only was it foreshadowed, but we've seen that opening tableau. We know how this ends. So, Linda dismisses the concern, and she says, "Never mind, ma'am. Ma'am, isn't it great? If he's working and we've got our own place, he'll be able to get himself together and stop taking those friggin' things." And they start to leave. "But listen, Linda, who..." "Oh, just some fella I know. He's on the housing committee." "You don't know him, ma'am." Now, of course, there is a moment of dramatic irony for you, because, of course, we know that Mrs. Linda knows him very well. In some ways, better than anyone, of course, because he is her son. Now, at that point, we'll take a pause on page 99.